Step aside, sir. Security concern. Those 5 words ended a 20-year aviation career. Captain Sterling thought he was protecting his aircraft. He didn't know the man he just humiliated was Marcus Henderson, the FAA official who regulated every pilot in the western United States. One phone call later, Sterling's entire company was grounded. Every plane, every pilot, everything stopped. Because Marcus Henderson had the authority to shut it all down, and Sterling had just given him every reason to use it. Before we show you how one racist decision destroyed everything, comment where you're from and hit like if you think Sterling is about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Subscribe for more stories of karma in action. Now let's see how prejudice destroyed a man's entire world.
Marcus Henderson wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention. At 48 years old, he moved through the world with quiet confidence. 6 feet tall, athletic build, always dressed impeccably in tailored suits. Today was no different. Navy blue suit, white dress shirt with French cuffs, silver cufflinks his late father had given him 20 years ago. Those cufflinks carried a story. His father, William Henderson, had been one of the Tuskegee Airmen, the legendary black pilots who fought in World War II despite facing brutal racism at home. William had flown 68 combat missions over Europe, shot down 3 enemy aircraft, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for valor. But when he returned home to America in 1945, restaurants refused to serve him. Hotels turned him away at the door. The country he'd risked his life to defend still saw him as inferior because of the color of his skin. Before William passed away in 2003, he told Marcus something that shaped his entire life. "Son, I fought for freedom in the sky, but I came home to a country where I wasn't free on the ground. When you get your chance, when you have power, use it to make sure the next generation doesn't face what we faced." Marcus had carried those words for 20 years. After graduating from MIT with a degree in aerospace engineering, he'd worked his way through the Federal Aviation Administration. Inspector, Senior Inspector, Regional Safety Director. Now, at 48, Marcus Henderson was the Regional Director of Aviation Safety for the entire Western United States. He oversaw every commercial airline, every charter operation, every pilot license from California to Montana. He had the authority to ground aircraft, suspend pilot certificates, shut down entire aviation companies if they violated federal regulations. And today, he was about to use that authority. The booking. 2 minutes. Marcus had booked the private charter 3 weeks ago through Sky Elite Aviation. A simple one-way flight from Los Angeles to San Francisco. Business meeting with FAA headquarters. Back by evening. He'd chosen private for a reason. Commercial flights had become exhausting. Even as a federal official, he couldn't escape the profiling. Gate agents questioning his first-class ticket. TSA agents selecting him for random additional screening every single time. Flight attendants watching him with suspicion. Just last month on a United flight, a gate agent had demanded to see his credit card to verify his business class ticket was legitimate. White passengers behind him had walked through without question. So today, Marcus had paid $8,000 for a private charter. Peace, quiet, professional service, no discrimination. Or so he thought. Van Nuys Airport's private aviation terminal was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, marble floors, leather furniture, fresh coffee brewing. The kind of place where wealthy executives and celebrities departed on private jets every day. Marcus walked through the automatic doors at 9:45 a.m., right on schedule for his 10 a.m. departure. The FBO receptionist, a young woman named Jennifer, greeted him professionally. She wore a navy blazer with long sleeves and the company logo embroidered on the pocket. "Mr. Henderson, welcome to Sky Elite Aviation. Your aircraft is ready on the ramp. Captain Sterling is completing his pre-flight inspection." "Thank you," Marcus replied, showing his confirmation email on his phone. Jennifer verified his information and handed him a leather folder with his flight details. "You're all set, sir. Right through those doors to the tarmac. Have an excellent flight." Marcus walked toward the glass doors leading outside. Through the windows, he could see it. A Cessna Citation X, one of the fastest business jets in the world, sleek white fuselage with blue striping, gleaming in the California morning sun. And standing next to it, conducting his pre-flight walk-around, was Captain Robert Sterling. 58 years old, silver-gray hair cut military short, tall, broad-shouldered. He wore the traditional pilot uniform, white shirt with epaulettes, navy pants, captain's hat tucked under his arm. He looked like he'd stepped out of a 1960s aviation poster, the image of authority and command. Marcus approached the aircraft stairs. "Good morning, Captain. Marcus Henderson. Beautiful morning for flying." Sterling barely glanced up from his checklist. "Yeah, give me a minute." It was the tone. Curt, dismissive. Marcus recognized that tone. He'd heard it his entire life. He waited patiently at the base of the stairs while Sterling continued his inspection, taking far longer than necessary to check the landing gear.
Sterling finally finished his walk-around and approached Marcus. But instead of welcoming his passenger, he stopped 3 feet away and looked Marcus up and down, studying him, evaluating him. "You're the passenger?" Sterling asked, his voice carrying a note of surprise mixed with something else, doubt, suspicion. "Yes, sir. Marcus Henderson. I have my confirmation right here." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing the booking email. Sterling didn't even look at the screen. "There's been a situation with the booking." Marcus kept his voice calm, professional. "What kind of situation?" "The manifest shows this charter was booked for a corporate executive business trip to San Francisco." "That's correct. I am a business executive, Federal Aviation Administration Regional Director of Aviation Safety." Sterling's eyes narrowed slightly. "You got proof of that?" The question hung in the air. White passengers never got asked for proof of their profession. But Marcus had been through this dance before. He reached into his jacket pocket. Sterling's hand actually moved toward the radio clipped to his belt, a defensive gesture, as if Marcus might be reaching for a weapon. Marcus pulled out his business card and handed it over. Sterling took it, examined it for maybe 2 seconds, then handed it back. "Anyone can print a card. You have official government identification?" "Captain, I showed my driver's license to your FBO staff. They verified my identity and my booking. Is there an actual problem with my flight?" That's when Sterling's professional mask slipped completely. His jaw tightened, his posture stiffened, and he said the words that would end his career. "Look, I'm the pilot in command of this aircraft, and I don't feel comfortable flying with you on board. I have a security concern." The accusation, 2 minutes. Marcus had been expecting this, not hoping for it, but expecting it. Because this wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the 20th time. He kept his voice level. "Captain Sterling, can you specify what security concern you have? I've passed through FBO security. My payment cleared 3 weeks ago. My identification has been verified. What exactly is the issue?" Sterling's face reddened. "I don't have to explain my decisions to passengers. I am the commander of this aircraft. My authority is final. If I determine there's a security risk, that's my call." "Based on what? What action have I taken or statement have I made that constitutes a security risk?" Sterling didn't answer because he couldn't. There was no action, no statement, no legitimate security concern. There was only Marcus's skin color. A voice called out from near the FBO entrance. "Bob, is everything all right?" The FBO manager, Richard Davies, had noticed the confrontation and walked out onto the tarmac. Davies was in his 50s, slightly overweight, wearing a polo shirt with the Sky Elite logo and khaki pants. Sterling turned to him, his voice taking on a different tone. Justified, righteous. "Richard, I need you to process a refund for this charter. I've made the decision not to proceed with this flight. Security concerns." Davies looked confused. He glanced between Sterling and Marcus. "Bob, Mr. Henderson's booking was confirmed 3 weeks ago. Payment cleared, background check completed. What security concerns?"
I don't need to justify my command decisions to you either, Richard. This is my aircraft, my license, my responsibility. I'm exercising my authority. Davies looked uncomfortable. He clearly recognized what was happening, but didn't want to confront Sterling directly. Mr. Henderson, I apologize for the confusion. Perhaps we can reschedule with a different aircraft and pilot. No, Sterling interrupted. He's not flying with Sky Elite, not on my watch. Have you ever been discriminated against based on your appearance? Comment number 1 if you've personally experienced this kind of treatment. Comment number 2 if you've witnessed it happening to someone else. And hit that like button right now if you think Captain Sterling is about to face the consequences of his prejudice. What do you think Marcus should do? Let us know in the comments.
A younger man emerged from the aircraft cabin. He wore the same pilot uniform, but with first officer epaulets instead of captain stripes. Michael Chen, 32 years old, Asian American, sharp features, alert eyes. Captain, what's going on? We're 10 minutes past scheduled departure. Sterling gestured toward Marcus with barely concealed contempt. We have a passenger situation. I've made the decision to cancel this flight. Chen looked at Marcus, then back at Sterling. You could see the understanding dawn on his face. Sir, what's the issue with the passenger? I have security concerns. What specific security concerns? Sterling's voice rose. I don't need to justify my command decisions to my first officer either, Mr. Chen. But Chen didn't back down. He'd seen this before, the older generation of pilots who carried prejudices from another era. Captain, with respect, denying service to a passenger requires documented cause. FAA regulations are very clear about this. What documentation do you have supporting a security concern? My professional judgment is the documentation. Your professional judgment based on what observable behavior or circumstance? The question was pointed, direct, forcing Sterling to either admit his racism or back down. Sterling chose to double down. First Officer Chen, you can either support your captain's authority or you can find another aircraft to fly. What's it going to be? Chen looked at Marcus. Their eyes met for a brief moment. And Marcus saw something in Chen's expression, recognition, sympathy, and most importantly, the courage to do the right thing even when it cost him. Captain Sterling, I'm formally objecting to this decision. For the record, this passenger has presented valid documentation, passed all required screenings, and exhibited no behavior warranting denial of service. I believe this constitutes discrimination based on race, which is a violation of federal civil rights law and FAA regulations. Sterling's face went purple with rage. Your objection is noted. Now get off my aircraft before I have you reported to the chief pilot. Chen stood his ground. Sir, I'm required by regulation to report safety violations, and discriminatory behavior by a pilot in command affects safety of flight operations. Marcus had heard enough. He pulled out his phone. Sterling immediately became defensive. What are you doing? Making a phone call. To who? Your lawyer? Go ahead. Sue me if you want. I have every right to refuse passengers I deem unsafe. I'm not calling a lawyer, Captain. Marcus dialed. The phone rang twice. A professional female voice answered, FAA Western Region Operations Center, this is Director Chang. Sterling's expression shifted from angry to confused. Why would this passenger have the FAA Operations Center on speed dial? Patricia, it's Marcus. I need you to implement Emergency Protocol Alpha. There was a pause on the line. Marcus, are you certain? That's a full regional ground order. Do you want to clarify the situation first? I'm certain. I'm currently at Van Nuys Airport, FBO terminal for Sky Elite Aviation. Tail number November 847 Sierra Echo. I've been denied boarding on a confirmed charter flight by the pilot in command, Captain Robert Sterling, based solely on racial discrimination. Sterling's face went pale. Davies looked like he might faint. Even Chen's eyes widened in shock. Patricia Chang's voice came through clearly, all business now. Understood.
Implementing Emergency Protocol Alpha. Regional ground order for all Sky Elite Aviation aircraft effective immediately. I'm dispatching investigators to your location. ETA 20 minutes. Thank you, Patricia. Marcus ended the call and looked directly at Sterling. Captain Robert Sterling, my name is Marcus Henderson. I am the Regional Director of Aviation Safety for the Federal Aviation Administration's Western Region. He pulled out his official FAA credentials, a leather wallet containing his federal identification card and gold badge. I have oversight authority for every commercial and private aviation operation in 12 Western states, including California. I have the authority to ground aircraft, suspend pilot certificates, and initiate federal investigations into regulatory violations. Sterling's mouth opened and closed silently. No words came out. Marcus continued, his voice calm but carrying absolute authority. You have just denied service to a federal aviation official based on racial prejudice. You violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You violated FAA Regulation 14 CFR Part 91.3 by allowing personal bias to compromise your judgment as pilot in command. And you demonstrated that you make operational decisions based on race rather than safety, which constitutes a fundamental failure of airmanship. Davies found his voice, barely a whisper. Mr. Henderson, I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, Mr. Davies. It's documented discrimination. And I've been recording this entire conversation. Marcus held up his phone, showing that the voice recorder had been running since he first approached Sterling. 30 seconds later, Sterling's phone started buzzing, then Davies' phone, then the FBO desk phone started ringing inside the terminal. Emergency notifications were going out across Sky Elite Aviation's network. Immediate ground stop. All Sky Elite aircraft returned to nearest airport. All pending departures canceled. FAA Regional Investigation initiated. Sterling stared at his phone in horror as text after text came through. His aircraft in Las Vegas, ordered back to base. His aircraft in Phoenix, grounded mid-taxi. His aircraft in Seattle, passengers deplaning. 14 aircraft across 4 states, all grounded, all because of him. Davies was frantically making calls, trying to understand what was happening. Chen stood quietly to the side, arms crossed, watching his captain's world collapse in real time. Marcus spoke again. Captain Sterling, as of this moment, you are relieved of duty pending FAA investigation. You are to surrender your pilot certificate and medical certificate to the investigators when they arrive. You are prohibited from operating any aircraft until this investigation is completed and a determination is made. You can't. This is my company. I built this. You built it, and you destroyed it in less than 15 minutes. Sterling looked around desperately, as if searching for someone to validate him, to tell him this wasn't happening. But Davies wouldn't make eye contact. Chen stood silent, offering no support. And Marcus Henderson stood there with the full authority of the federal government behind him. What Sterling didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that this wasn't Marcus's first encounter with discrimination at Sky Elite Aviation. It was his third. 6 months ago, Marcus had received a formal complaint from a black businesswoman who chartered a Sky Elite flight. The pilot had questioned whether she could afford the service, demanded to see her credit card, and made her wait 30 minutes while he verified her booking, even though white passengers had boarded without any questions. 4 months ago, another complaint. A black doctor had been asked to show his medical license to prove he was actually a physician after he mentioned his profession to the flight crew. The pilot had told him, "We get a lot of people claiming to be doctors," while allowing white passengers to make similar statements without verification. 2 months ago, a black military officer in uniform had been stopped from boarding his chartered flight because the pilot had concerns about his documentation, despite the man carrying a valid military ID and top-secret security clearance. All 3 complaints had been filed with the FAA. All three had been forwarded to Sky Elite Management for internal investigation. All three had been dismissed as misunderstandings with no disciplinary action taken. So Marcus had made a decision. He would conduct his own investigation, personally. He'd booked this charter under his own name, using his private credit card instead of a government account. Nothing on the booking indicated he was an FAA official. He'd wanted to see how he would be treated as just another black passenger. And Sterling had shown him exactly what he needed to see. "Captain Sterling," Marcus said, "this is not personal. This is about a pattern of discriminatory behavior by your company that has been documented, reported, and ignored. Today, that pattern ends." Sterling's voice was barely a whisper. "I have a family. I have a business. I have pilots and employees who depend on me. You should have thought about that before you decided I was a security risk based on the color of my skin." The investigators arrive. 3 minutes. True to Patricia Chang's word, 2 FAA investigators arrived in an unmarked government vehicle exactly 18 minutes after Marcus's phone call. Senior Inspector Janet Morrison and Inspector David Kim, both dressed in business professional attire. Morrison in a pantsuit with long sleeves and high collar, Kim in a suit and tie. Morrison approached Marcus first. "Director Henderson, we received the emergency protocol alert. What's the situation?" Marcus briefed them efficiently, providing the recording of his conversation with Sterling, the documentation of previous complaints, and the contact information for First Officer Chen as a witness. Morrison turned to Sterling. "Captain, I need your pilot certificate and medical certificate, now." Sterling's hands shook as he pulled out his wallet and removed the 2 cards he'd carried for 20 years, the certificates that represented his identity, his career, his entire life. He handed them over. Morrison placed them in an evidence bag. "Captain Robert Sterling, you are hereby notified that your pilot privileges are suspended pending investigation into violations of federal aviation regulations and civil rights law. You are not to operate any aircraft or exercise any pilot privileges until further notice. Do you understand?" Sterling nodded, unable to speak. Kim addressed Davies. "Mr. Davies, we'll need access to all Sky Elite personnel records, flight logs, and customer complaint files. We'll also need to interview all current and former pilots regarding company policies and training on non-discrimination." Davies nodded numbly. "Whatever you need, Inspector." The investigation had officially begun. Captain Sterling just lost everything. His pilot license, his company, his entire career. Comment justice if you think he got exactly what he deserved. Comment karma if you believe prejudice should have consequences. And make sure you're subscribed because this story gets even more intense. What do you think happens to Sterling next? Drop your predictions below. Within 1 hour of Marcus's phone call, the situation at Van Nuys Airport had transformed completely. What started as one denied boarding had cascaded into a full federal investigation affecting hundreds of people across 4 states. Sky Elite Aviation's operations center in Burbank was in chaos. Dispatchers were fielding calls from furious passengers whose flights had been canceled mid-journey. Corporate clients were demanding explanations for why their executives were stranded at airports. And the CEO, Thomas Whitmore, was racing toward Van Nuys after receiving an emergency call from Richard Davies. Sterling sat on a bench outside the FBO terminal, his head in his hands. Everything he'd built over 20 years was collapsing. Not because of a mechanical failure, not because of an accident, because he'd looked at a black man and decided he was a threat. First Officer Chen approached him cautiously. "Captain, I tried to warn you." Sterling looked up, his eyes red. "You betrayed your captain. You sided with a passenger over your commander." "No, sir. I sided with federal law over your prejudice. There's a difference." Chen walked away, leaving Sterling alone with the weight of his choices. Inspector Morrison set up a temporary interview station inside the FBO's conference room. She started with First Officer Chen. "Officer Chen, Please describe in detail what you observed during the interaction between Captain Sterling and Mr. Henderson. Chen was precise, methodical. I emerged from the aircraft at approximately 09:55 hours. Captain Sterling and Mr. Henderson were engaged in a conversation near the aircraft stairs. Sterling's body language was defensive and confrontational. When I asked about the delay, Sterling stated he had security concerns about the passenger. I asked him to specify those concerns. He could not or would not provide any specific behavioral or documentation issues. I then asked what his professional judgment was based on. He became agitated and told me I needed to support his authority or find another aircraft. Morrison made notes. In your professional opinion, did Mr. Henderson exhibit any behavior that would warrant security concerns? Absolutely not. He was calm, professional, and cooperative throughout. He presented valid documentation when requested. His demeanor was entirely appropriate. And what was your impression of Captain Sterling's reasoning? Chen paused, choosing his words carefully. Ma'am, I believe Captain Sterling made his determination based solely on Mr. Henderson's race. There was no other observable factor that would explain his reaction. Morrison nodded. Thank you, Officer Chen. Your cooperation is noted and appreciated. Inspector Kim was reviewing Sky Elite's complaint files on his laptop. What he found was damning. Over the past 18 months, Sky Elite had received 14 formal passenger complaints alleging discrimination. 12 of those complaints came from passengers of color. 9 specifically mentioned Captain Sterling. But when Kim cross-referenced these complaints with disciplinary records, he found something stunning. 0. Not a single disciplinary action had been taken. Every complaint had been investigated by the same person, Chief Pilot Thomas Bradley, Sterling's longtime friend and business partner. Every investigation had concluded the same way. No evidence of discriminatory intent. Pilot was following standard security protocols. But the complaints told a different story. Captain Sterling asked to see my credit card to verify I could afford the charter, even though payment had cleared weeks before. White passengers behind me were not asked for any additional verification. Sterling questioned whether I was actually a physician, demanded to see my medical license, and made me wait while he confirmed my credentials with my hospital. This verification was not requested of any white passengers. The pilot refused to fly with my family, claiming our children seemed disruptive, even though they had been sitting quietly the entire time. A white family with louder children boarded without issue. The pattern was undeniable, and Sky Elite management had systematically covered it up. When it was Sterling's turn to be interviewed, he tried to maintain his composure. Morrison started with a simple question. Captain Sterling, why did you deny boarding to Mr. Henderson? I had security concerns. Based on what specific observations? Sterling hesitated. His behavior seemed off. Can you describe what behavior seemed off? He seemed nervous. Morrison checked her notes. First Officer Chen stated that Mr. Henderson appeared calm and professional. Your FBO receptionist stated he was polite and courteous. What specifically made you perceive nervousness? Sterling couldn't answer. Morrison continued. Captain, I've reviewed your employment history with Sky Elite. In the past 18 months, you've had 9 complaints from passengers alleging discriminatory treatment. All 9 complainants were people of color. Can you explain that pattern? Those were all misunderstandings. People are too quick to claim discrimination. Captain, please look at this document. Morrison slid a printed sheet across the table. It was a transcript of Sterling's conversation with Marcus, taken from the recording. The words looked even worse in black and white. Sterling, I don't feel comfortable flying with you on board. Henderson, based on what? I don't have to explain my decisions to you. Morrison pointed to another section. Sterling, you look like. Captain, you stopped yourself mid-sentence. What were you about to say Mr. Henderson looked like? Sterling's face flushed. I don't remember. You don't remember something you said 45 minutes ago? Silence. Captain Sterling, in my 15 years as an FAA investigator, I've seen many cases of poor judgment. This isn't poor judgment. This is systematic discrimination, and the evidence is overwhelming. Thomas Whitmore burst into the FBO looking like he'd aged 10 years in 2 hours. At 52, he was Sky Elite's founder and CEO. He'd built the company from a single aircraft to 14 jets over 20 years. And now it was all at risk because of one pilot's racism. He found Richard Davies first. "Richard, where is Sterling?" Outside, the FAA investigators have already interviewed him. And Henderson?
He left an hour ago, commercial flight to San Francisco, but the investigators are still here. Whitmore approached Inspector Morrison. "I'm Thomas Whitmore, CEO of Sky Elite Aviation. I need to understand what's happening to my company." Morrison was blunt. "Mr. Whitmore, your company has a serious problem. We've documented a pattern of racial discrimination spanning at least 18 months, involving multiple pilots, with complaints systematically dismissed by your management." "I wasn't aware of any pattern." "That's part of the problem, sir. Your chief pilot has been burying complaints to protect his friend. Your company culture enabled discrimination to flourish unchecked." "I wasn't aware of any pattern." "That's part of the problem, sir. Your chief pilot has been burying complaints to protect his friend. Your company culture enabled discrimination to flourish unchecked." Whitmore looked sick. "What happens now?" "Now we conduct a full audit of your operations. Every complaint filed in the past 5 years will be reinvestigated. Every pilot and dispatcher will be interviewed. Your training materials and company policies will be reviewed for compliance with federal anti-discrimination law." "And Sterling?" "His pilot certificate has been suspended pending a formal hearing. Given the evidence, I expect that suspension to become a permanent revocation." Whitmore pulled out his phone. "I need to call our legal counsel." "You do that, Mr. Whitmore. But understand something. No amount of lawyers will change what happened today. The evidence is documented, recorded, and witnessed. Your company either cooperates fully with this investigation or faces administrative action that could include suspension of your operating certificate." The threat was clear: cooperate or be shut down. The investigation is just beginning. But Sterling's career is already over. Comment accountability if you think companies need to take discrimination seriously. Comment consequences if you believe Sterling should never fly again. And smash that like button if you think Sky Elite Aviation is about to face major changes. What do you think the company should do? Let us know below. 3 weeks later, Sterling sat in a sterile conference room at FAA headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Across the table sat a 3-person review board. Chairwoman Helen Morrison, no relation to Inspector Morrison. Senior Aviation Safety Inspector with 30 years experience. Board member James Rodriguez, former airline captain, now FAA examiner. Board member Dr. Patricia Williams, aviation psychologist specializing in crew resource management and judgment. Sterling had hired an attorney, David Fisher, who specialized in aviation law. But even Fisher had told him the truth. "Bob, the evidence is overwhelming. The best we can hope for is a temporary suspension instead of permanent revocation." Chairwoman Morrison called the hearing to order. "This is a certificate action hearing for Captain Robert Sterling, ATP certificate number 184756. Captain Sterling stands accused of violating federal aviation regulations and civil rights law through discriminatory denial of service to a passenger." She laid out the evidence systematically. The recording of Sterling's conversation with Marcus. First Officer Chen's sworn testimony. The 9 previous complaints, all from passengers of color. The pattern of behavior spanning 18 months. Fisher tried to mount a defense. Chairwoman Morrison, Captain Sterling has 20 years of safe flying, an exemplary military record. No accidents, no incidents. This was a single moment of poor judgment. Counselor, 9 documented complaints over 18 months is not a single moment. It's a pattern. Dr. Williams leaned forward.
Captain Sterling, I'd like to ask you directly, why did you refuse to fly with Mr. Henderson? Sterling had prepared for this question. Fisher had coached him. I had concerns about security that I felt in my professional judgment as pilot in command. Stop, Dr. Williams interrupted. Captain, I'm a psychologist. I study human behavior and decision-making. I've reviewed the entire case file. I've watched the video recording. I've read every complaint against you. You didn't have security concerns. You had racial prejudice. And that prejudice compromised your judgment to such a degree that you discriminated against a federal official simply because he was black. Sterling tried to protest. I'm not a racist. Captain, you don't have to wear a hood and burn crosses to be racist. Racism isn't just explicit hatred. It's unconscious bias that makes you perceive threat where none exist. It's assuming that a black man in an expensive suit must have stolen his credit card. It's asking black passengers to prove their credentials while white passengers walk on without question. That's what you did, repeatedly. And when confronted, you doubled down instead of recognizing your error. Rodriguez, the former airline captain, spoke next. Captain Sterling, I flew for 35 years. I know what command authority means. But command authority comes with responsibility. The responsibility to treat every passenger fairly. The responsibility to make decisions based on safety, not prejudice. You failed that responsibility, not once, but repeatedly over 18 months.
The board deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, Chairwoman Morrison's face was grave. Captain Robert Sterling, this board has reviewed all evidence presented. We find that you violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by discriminating against passengers based on race. We find that you violated 14 CFR 91.3 by allowing personal bias to compromise your judgment as pilot in command. We find that your pattern of behavior demonstrates a fundamental lack of the care, judgment, and responsibility required to safely exercise the privileges of an airline transport pilot certificate. Therefore, effective immediately, we are issuing an emergency order of revocation for all airman certificates issued to you by the Federal Aviation Administration. Sterling's attorney interjected. Madam Chairman, we request that the revocation be stayed pending appeal. Denied. The pattern of discrimination poses an immediate threat to air safety and passenger rights. The revocation is effective immediately. Morrison continued. Captain Sterling, you are to surrender all pilot certificates and medical certificates in your possession. You are prohibited from exercising any pilot privileges. You may petition for reconsideration after 24 months, but only after completing documented diversity training and psychological evaluation. She paused, then added something that wasn't in the formal language. Captain, you had a gift, the ability to fly, and you squandered it because you couldn't see past the color of someone's skin. That's not just a professional failure, it's a moral one. The hearing was over. Sterling's 20-year career ended with the sound of a gavel. The financial collapse, 4 minutes. The revocation was just the beginning of Sterling's fall. Within 48 hours, the business consequences cascaded. First, the aircraft lease. Sterling's Citation was leased from a bank with strict covenants. One covenant required the primary pilot to maintain an active ATP certificate. With Sterling's certificate revoked, the lease went into default. The bank repo team arrived at the hangar within a week. They chained the aircraft and flew it away, leaving Sterling with nothing but penalties and fees. Total loss, $385,000 in early termination penalties and unpaid lease obligations. Second, the insurance. Sterling's aviation insurance was instantly voided. The policy required all pilots to maintain valid certificates. Without valid insurance, Sterling couldn't operate any aircraft even if he wanted to. Third, the contracts. Sky Elite had 6 corporate clients on long-term charter agreements.
All 6 canceled within 10 days, citing the FAA investigation and reputational concerns. Lost revenue, approximately $1.2 million annually. Fourth, the lawsuits. 3 former passengers who'd filed discrimination complaints saw the FAA findings and immediately hired civil rights attorneys. The lawsuits claimed emotional distress, reputational harm, and civil rights violations. Sterling's personal assets were now at risk. His business attorney gave him the harsh truth. Bob, you're looking at potential liability in excess of $2 million. Your business assets won't cover it. They'll come after your personal assets, your house, your retirement accounts, everything. Sterling had gone from comfortable business owner to potential bankruptcy in less than a month. But the financial devastation was nothing compared to the personal toll. Sterling's wife, Brenda, had initially stood by him. She'd believed his version of events, that he was the victim, that Marcus Henderson had set him up, that political correctness had destroyed his career. But then she made the mistake of reading the actual FAA report. She saw the 9 complaints. She saw the pattern. She saw the recording transcript where her husband couldn't explain his security concerns. And she finally saw the truth. One evening, 6 weeks after the hearing, Brenda confronted him at their home in Thousand Oaks. Sterling was in the living room, drinking coffee and watching planes take off from a nearby airport on his tablet, torturing himself with the sight of aircraft he could no longer fly. Brenda sat down across from him holding a folder. "Bob, I need you to tell me the truth, not your lawyer's version, not what you wish had happened, the truth." "I've told you the truth." "No, you've told me excuses. I read the full FAA report today, all of it, every complaint, every witness statement, the recording transcript." She opened the folder and pulled out a highlighted document. "This is from a complaint filed 13 months ago. A black female doctor named Dr. Sarah Johnson chartered your plane for a medical conference. You made her wait 40 minutes while you verified her credentials. You called her hospital to confirm she actually worked there. You asked to see her medical license. The white businessman you flew the next day, you asked him 0 questions. You believed he was a businessman because he said he was." Sterling looked away. "I was being thorough." "With black passengers. You're only thorough with black passengers, Bob. That's called racism." "I'm not racist, Brenda. I've never used slurs, never treated anyone with disrespect." "You don't have to use slurs to be racist. You just have to assume that black people are suspicious, that they don't belong in first class, that they must have done something wrong to afford your services." Brenda's voice cracked. "Bob, we've been married for 28 years. I thought I knew you, but reading these complaints, seeing this pattern, I don't know who you are." Sterling tried to reach for her hand. She pulled away. "Brenda, please, I made a mistake. 9 complaints, Bob, 9. That's not a mistake. That's who you chose to be." She stood up, pulling an envelope from the folder. "I've consulted with a divorce attorney. These are separation papers. I'm moving in with my sister in San Diego. I can't be married to someone who destroyed his own life because he couldn't treat people fairly." "Brenda, wait, we can work through this." "No, Bob. I've watched you these past 6 weeks. You're not remorseful. You're not sorry for what you did. You're just sorry you got caught. You still think you're the victim." She walked toward the door, then turned back. "That federal official you humiliated, Marcus Henderson, his father was a Tuskegee Airman. Do you understand what that means? His father fought for this country in World War II, came home and couldn't eat at restaurants because of his skin color. 80 years later, his son, a federal aviation director, gets denied boarding because you looked at him and saw a threat. You didn't just discriminate against one man, Bob. You perpetuated a legacy of racism that should have died generations ago." She left. Sterling sat alone in the house, listening to her car pull away. Everything was gone. his career, his business, his marriage. All because he'd looked at Marcus Henderson and seen a threat instead of a person.
Sterling lost his career, his business, his marriage, all because of racism. Comment "deserve it" if you think these consequences were justified. Comment "lesson learned" if you think Sterling finally understands what he did. And make sure you're subscribed because we're about to show you where Sterling ended up 6 months later. It's going to shock you.
Robert Sterling stood in the cold fluorescent lighting of a 24-hour warehouse complex in Ontario, California. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. He wore a cheap polyester security guard uniform, navy blue pants that were slightly too big, a light blue shirt with a patch that read Secure Watch Security Services, and a clip-on tie. His command post was a small glass booth with a flickering monitor showing grainy security camera feeds. The pay was $14 an hour. No benefits, no retirement plan, no respect. This was what his life had become. At 58 years old, the man who once commanded million-dollar aircraft now watched empty warehouses through security cameras. His shifts started at midnight and ended at 8 a.m. 8 hours of silent isolation broken only by the occasional truck delivery or the sound of his own thoughts. The radio at his belt crackled. "Unit 7, this is dispatch. Everything clear at the Ontario warehouse?" Sterling picked up the radio. "Unit 7, all clear." "Copy that. Stay alert." Stay alert, as if watching empty buildings required the same vigilance as flying aircraft through complex airspace. But this was all he could get. He'd applied for dozens of jobs over the past 6 months. Aviation safety consultant, flight school instructor, even aircraft maintenance coordinator. Every application ended the same way. "We'll keep your resume on file." Because a simple background check revealed the truth. Pilot certificate revoked for racial discrimination. No aviation company would touch him. So he'd moved down the ladder. Airport operations, ground crew, anything connected to aviation. Still nothing. Finally, he'd applied for jobs with no connection to flying. Warehouse manager, logistics coordinator, office administrator. But even there, his age worked against him. Who wants to hire a 58-year-old with a recent employment gap and a history that ends with federal certificate revocation? Security guard was the only offer he got, and he'd taken it because he had no choice. Sterling was making his rounds through the warehouse complex at 3:15 a.m. when he heard voices near the loading dock. He approached cautiously. Sometimes homeless people tried to sleep in the covered areas. But as he got closer, he recognized one of the voices. Deep, measured, authoritative. His blood went cold. Marcus Henderson. What was he doing here at 3 a.m.? Sterling peered around the corner. Marcus was there, wearing a suit and tie despite the late hour, talking with 2 other men in business attire. They were inspecting loading equipment and reviewing documents on a tablet. Then Sterling understood. This was an FAA inspection, random overnight spot check of cargo operations. Marcus hadn't seen him yet. Sterling could just walk away, continue his rounds, avoid the confrontation. But something in him needed, what? Vindication? An apology? Recognition that he'd been treated unfairly? He stepped forward. Marcus looked up from his tablet. For 3 seconds, they just stared at each other. The federal official who destroyed his career, and the disgraced pilot now working as a night security guard. One of Marcus's colleagues noticed attention. "Director Henderson, is everything all right?" Marcus kept his eyes on Sterling. "Yes, give me a moment." He walked over, stopping a respectful distance away. "Captain Sterling?" "I'm not a captain anymore. You made sure of that." Marcus's voice was calm, neutral. "No, you made sure of that. I just enforced the consequences." Sterling felt anger rising in his chest. "You set me up. You booked that flight specifically to entrap me. I booked a charter flight with legitimate documentation. You chose to discriminate. That wasn't entrapment. That was your decision. I had security concerns." Based on what? My skin color? Because that's what 9 previous complaints documented. And you know what the tragic part is, Sterling? I gave you multiple opportunities to back down, multiple chances to make the right choice. Sterling's hands clenched. My life is destroyed. My business is gone. My wife left me. I'm working as a security guard because of you. No, because of you. Because you couldn't see past your own prejudice. The truth, 4 minutes. Marcus gestured toward the loading dock where they could talk privately, away from his colleagues. Sterling followed, not sure why. They stood in the shadows between 2 trailers. Marcus spoke first. Do you know why I conducted that investigation? To make an example of me, to advance your career by taking down a white pilot. My father was William Henderson, Tuskegee Airman, flew 68 combat missions in World War II, shot down 3 enemy planes, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. Sterling was silent. When he came home in 1945, restaurants wouldn't serve him. Hotels turned him away. The military wouldn't let him fly commercial because airlines didn't want black pilots. He died in 2003. You want to know what his last words to me were? Marcus's voice was steady, but there was emotion underneath. He said, "Son, I fought for freedom in the sky. Make sure the next generation doesn't have to fight the same battles on the ground." So when I became regional director, I made it my mission to ensure that passengers of color could fly without discrimination, that black pilots could pursue careers without facing what my father faced. And then I started receiving complaints about your company, 9 complaints in 18 months, all from passengers of color, all dismissed by your management. Sterling tried to interrupt. Those were misunderstandings. They weren't misunderstandings. They were a pattern. And I knew that if I filed an official complaint, your company would investigate itself and find nothing wrong, again. So I became a passenger. I wanted to see firsthand what was happening, and you showed me exactly what I needed to see. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Sterling a photo. It was a young black teenager in a flight school uniform, standing next to a small aircraft with a huge smile. This is Jamal Carter. He's 17. He wants to be an airline pilot. After your case became public, his father contacted me, said his son was too scared to pursue aviation because of how black people get treated at airports. I mentored Jamal, got him connected with a flight school. He soloed 3 months ago. He's going to be a pilot. That's why I did what I did, Sterling, not to destroy you, but to create a path for kids like Jamal who shouldn't have to be afraid to dream.
Sterling stood there, processing what Marcus had said. For 6 months, he'd been the victim in his own mind, the man who'd been wronged by political correctness and federal overreach. But standing here in a warehouse at 3 a.m., wearing a security guard uniform while Marcus Henderson conducting FAA inspections in a suit and tie, the reality was impossible to deny. "I didn't think I was racist," Sterling said quietly. "I really didn't. I never used slurs, never treated anyone with intentional cruelty. I just had concerns. Concerns you only had about black passengers. I didn't see it that way. I thought I was being thorough, professional, protecting my aircraft. But you only felt the need to be thorough with passengers of color. White passengers could board without question. That's implicit bias, Sterling, and it's still racism even if you don't consciously intend it." Sterling felt something break inside him. Not anger, not defensiveness, just the crushing weight of recognition. "I destroyed my own life, didn't I?" "Yes. There's no coming back from this." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Not in aviation. Your certificate revocation is permanent in practical terms. No airline or charter service will ever hire you, even if you could get your certificate reinstated. But you're not destroyed as a human being, Sterling. You can still learn, still grow, still become better than you were." "How? I'm 58 years old, working night security, divorced, broke." "You have a choice.
You can spend the rest of your life bitter and resentful, blaming me and the system. Or you can use this experience to actually change, to help others avoid your mistakes. Sterling looked at him skeptically. Who would listen to a disgraced pilot? People who need to hear from someone who actually learned the hard way. Someone who can say, I let prejudice destroy my career, my marriage, my life. Don't make my mistakes. Sterling and Marcus just had the conversation Sterling needed 6 months ago. Comment growth if you think Sterling can actually change. Comment too late if you think he's beyond redemption. And smash that like button if you believe people can learn from their mistakes. What would you do if you were Sterling? Let us know below. Sterling sat in front of a classroom at the Ontario Community College. 28 adults sat in desk chairs, notebooks open, looking at him with curiosity. The course was called Confronting Unconscious Bias in the Workplace, and Sterling was one of the instructors. He'd never imagined this would be his life. But 8 months ago, after his conversation with Marcus Henderson, something had shifted. He'd started attending a therapy group for people dealing with the consequences of their own prejudice. Court-ordered for some, voluntary for others. At first, he'd been defensive, argumentative, still clinging to the idea that he'd been treated unfairly. But over weeks and months, listening to other people's stories, he'd started to see patterns. The white manager who only disciplined black employees. The teacher who assumed Latino students were less capable. The police officer who stopped black drivers at higher rates. All of them convinced they weren't racist. All of them with data proving otherwise. And Sterling had finally looked in the mirror and seen the truth. Now he stood before a classroom, about to tell his story. My name is Robert Sterling, he began. 1 year ago, I was a pilot. I owned a charter aviation company. I had a wife, a home, a comfortable life. Today, I work as a security guard making $14 an hour. I'm divorced. I lost everything. Not because of the economy, not because of an accident, but because I discriminated against passengers based on the color of their skin. He pulled up a slide showing the FAA Revocation order. This is the document that ended my career. It's a federal order revoking my pilot certificate for violating civil rights law and aviation regulations. I discriminated against 9 black passengers over 18 months. I asked them to prove their credentials while white passengers walked on without question. I questioned whether they could afford my services. I made them feel like criminals for trying to fly on an aircraft they had every right to board. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Did you know you were being racist? Sterling shook his head. No, that's the thing about unconscious bias. I didn't think I was racist. I'd never used slurs, never intentionally hurt anyone. I just had concerns. But those concerns were only triggered by black passengers. White passengers didn't raise the same red flags in my mind. And that's racism, even if I didn't consciously intend it. He showed another slide, the 9 complaints against him. I read these after I lost my license. Every single one described the same pattern. Extra scrutiny for passengers of color, easy passage for white passengers. And you know what the worst part is? My company investigated every complaint, and every time they concluded there was no discrimination. Because I was their friend. Because admitting I was discriminatory would cost them money. Because it was easier to dismiss complaints than address the problem. A man in the back spoke up. So what changed? How did you finally see it? I got caught. A federal aviation official experienced my discrimination firsthand. He documented it, recorded it, and enforced the law. But even then, I didn't see it. I spent 6 months blaming him, blaming the system, playing the victim. It wasn't until I had a conversation with that official, standing in a warehouse at 3 a.m. while I was working security and he was conducting inspections, that I finally understood. He told me about his father, a Tuskegee airman who fought for this country and came home to segregation. He told me about young black kids too scared to pursue aviation because of people like me. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't the victim. I was the perpetrator of a legacy of racism I should have been fighting against. After the class, a young black woman approached Sterling. She was maybe 25, wearing business casual attire with long sleeves and a professional demeanor. "Mr. Sterling, I wanted to thank you for sharing your story." Sterling was surprised. "Thank you for listening. Can I ask what brought you to this class?" "I'm an HR manager at a tech company. We've had complaints about discriminatory hiring practices. Management asked me to investigate, but honestly, I wasn't sure how to identify unconscious bias. Your story helped me see it. It's not about intentional hatred. It's about patterns. Asking certain people for extra credentials while giving others the benefit of the doubt." She paused. "Can I ask you something personal? Do you regret what you did?" Sterling thought carefully about his answer. "Every single day. Not just because of what I lost, though that's real, but because of the harm I caused. 9 passengers who paid for a service and were made to feel like they didn't belong. How many others never complained but still felt humiliated? I can't undo that harm. Those passengers will carry that experience forever. All I can do now is try to prevent others from making the same mistakes." The woman nodded. "Well, your testimony will help. I'm going to recommend my company bring you in to speak to our hiring managers." It wasn't much. It wasn't vindication or redemption, but it was something. Meanwhile, across the country at FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C., Marcus Henderson stood before a congressional committee. The hearing was titled, "Ensuring Equal Access to Air Travel, Addressing Discrimination in Commercial Aviation." Representative Maria Santos, chair of the Aviation Subcommittee, addressed Marcus. "Director Henderson, your investigation into Sky Elite Aviation sparked a nationwide conversation about discrimination in air travel. What have been the results of that investigation?" Marcus responded with characteristic precision. "Madam Chair, the investigation revealed systematic failures at multiple levels. Sky Elite Aviation was found to have a pattern of discriminatory practices spanning 18 months, affecting at least 14 documented passengers of color. As a result of our findings, Sky Elite implemented comprehensive reforms: mandatory bias training for all employees, an independent complaint review system, and regular audits by external civil rights experts. More significantly, our investigation triggered a voluntary industry-wide review. 7 major airlines and 23 charter operators conducted internal audits of their complaint systems and training programs. We documented a 47% reduction in discrimination complaints across the aviation sector over the past 12 months. Representative James Wheeler, a skeptical voice, interjected. "Director Henderson, some have criticized your methods as entrapment. You deliberately booked a flight to expose discrimination. Isn't that government overreach?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Congressman, I purchased a legitimate charter flight with my own money, using my personal credit card. I presented valid documentation. I violated no laws and engaged in no deceptive behavior. The only thing I did was exist as a black passenger. If that alone triggers discriminatory treatment, the problem isn't my methodology. It's the bias in the system. And respectfully, sir, calling it entrapment suggests that discriminating against black passengers is somehow acceptable as long as no one with authority is watching. That's exactly the attitude we're trying to change." The room was silent for a moment. Representative Santos spoke. "Director Henderson, what message do you have for aviation professionals watching this hearing?" Marcus looked directly into the camera. "Your authority as a pilot, as a gate agent, as an airline employee comes with responsibility. The responsibility to treat every passenger with equal dignity and respect. When you make decisions based on someone's appearance rather than their behavior or documentation, you're not protecting safety, you're perpetuating discrimination. And there are consequences, real, permanent consequences. Captain Sterling learned that the hard way." After the hearing, Marcus returned to his hotel room and checked his email. One message made him smile. Subject: "I did it." Sender: Jamal Carter. Marcus opened it.
Director Henderson, I passed my commercial pilot check ride today. I'm officially a commercial pilot. My examiner was a black woman named Captain Johnson. She told me she became a pilot because of the changes in the industry over the past year. She said your investigation opened doors for people like her. I start as a first officer with Regional Express Airlines next month. My first day in uniform, I'm going to think about your father and all the Tuskegee Airmen who fought so I could have this opportunity. Thank you for believing in me when I was too scared to believe in myself. Marcus sat back in his chair, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. This was why he'd done it. Not to destroy Sterling's career, though that had been the consequence, but to create a path for Jamal and thousands of other young people who deserve to pursue their dreams without facing discrimination. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Monica. Watch the hearing. You were brilliant. The kids are proud of you. I'm proud of you. Come home soon. Love you. Marcus typed back, on my way. Love you too.
Jamal Carter is now a commercial pilot. Captain Sterling is teaching others about his mistakes. Marcus Henderson changed an entire industry. Comment justice if this is how accountability should work. Comment hope if you believe people can change. And make sure you're subscribed for more stories where standing up for what's right makes a real difference. One more scene left. You won't want to miss this. Marcus Henderson stood at Gate 14 of Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. He was flying commercial today, routine business trip to a safety conference in Dallas. As he waited to board, he watched the gate agent, a young black woman named Destiny Williams, process passengers with efficiency and professionalism. When Marcus approached with his boarding pass, she smiled. "Mr. Henderson, seat 3A, welcome aboard." No extra questions, no scrutiny, just professional service. Marcus boarded the aircraft and settled into his seat. The flight attendant, a Latina woman with her hair pulled back professionally, welcomed him warmly. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" "Water would be great, thank you." She brought it without hesitation, without suspicion, without treating him any differently than any other passenger. This was progress. Real, measurable progress. Not because discrimination had been eliminated, it hadn't, and probably never would be completely, but because the systems that had enabled it were changing. Training improved, accountability increased, complaints taken seriously. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Marcus pulled out his tablet and opened his email. A message from Sterling. "Director Henderson, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to let you know that I've been working with the Aviation Safety Foundation to develop a training program on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias in aviation operations. We've presented to 12 airlines and 43 charter operators over the past year. The feedback has been positive. People are willing to listen when the message comes from someone who actually experienced the consequences of bias. I'll never fly commercially again. That door is permanently closed. But maybe I can help ensure that the next generation of pilots treats passengers fairly. I know an apology doesn't undo the harm I caused. But for what it's worth, I'm sorry. To you, to the 9 passengers I discriminated against, and to everyone who ever felt unwelcome on an aircraft because of how they looked. I'm trying to be better. Robert Sterling." Marcus read it twice, then typed a response. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for your email and for the work you're doing. Accountability isn't just about punishment, it's about change. You made serious mistakes that harmed real people. You lost your career because of those mistakes. Those are the consequences. But consequences don't have to be the end of the story. The fact that you're using your experience to educate others shows growth. That matters. Keep doing the work. Marcus Henderson." He hit send. The aircraft reached cruising altitude. Marcus looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about his father. William Henderson had fought in the sky so that his son could regulate it, and Marcus had fought battles on the ground so that Jamal Carter and thousands like him could fly without fear. The work wasn't finished. It never would be. But it was better, measurably, tangibly better, and that was worth fighting for.
This is a story about choices and consequences. Captain Robert Sterling chose prejudice over professionalism, and he lost everything. Marcus Henderson chose accountability over comfort, and he changed an industry. The lesson isn't that everyone who discriminates will face instant karma. The world doesn't always work that way. But the lesson is this: discrimination has real consequences for the victims who experience humiliation and harm, and sometimes, when the right person with the right authority witnesses it, for the perpetrators too. If you've experienced discrimination, document it, report it, speak up. If you witness discrimination, don't be a bystander. Support the victims, report what you see. And if you have authority like Marcus Henderson, use it to create systems where discrimination faces real consequences. Because change doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people with power decide that justice matters more than comfort. If this story moved you, hit that like button. If you believe discrimination should have consequences, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And subscribe to this channel for more stories where accountability meets justice. Have you ever witnessed discrimination? What did you do about it? Share your story below. Thank you for watching. Stand up, speak out, and never let prejudice win.